So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in Geneva, and it's an honor to give the opening talk. My name is Michael Hausding. I work for Switch, and Switch runs the registry for .ch. And I'm going to talk about domain names, about how we use domain names, and about how criminals use and abuse domain names. So first of all, why do we use domain names? Who knows what is this? Who is behind this URL? Most of you will not know, but most of you will know what is behind this URL. So there are two reasons why we use domain names, or two things domain names do. One thing is we can remember them. A few people can remember IPv4 addresses, very few people can remember IPv6 addresses. That's obvious. But then there's a second thing. If you see the first URL, you don't get any idea what's behind. If you see the second URL, you get an idea and you get a context and you know what you expect on that website, or if you receive an email from that domain name. So for humans, domain names are trust anchors in the online world. If you receive an email from someone, let's say creditsuisse.ch, you assume that's a bank. I know most of the people here are critical and will have a second look if it really comes from Credit Suisse. But for most of the people, domain names gives an initial stage of trust, and that's something that criminals abuse. But before I talk about the criminal use of domain names, I talk about the normal use of domain names. So what are we using domain names for? Today there are two things basically we use domain names for. One is for email. That's still the most important messaging way. And the second is websites. Websites for e-commerce, for personal websites. Everything usually runs over HTTP or HTTPS. There's a third reason why people buy domain names, and that's for selling them for a much more expensive price. I will not target that. For today, I will focus on how do we use domain names for emails and websites. So how many domain names are there worldwide? At the end of last year, there were 332.4 million domain names, and the number of domain names is still increasing. Why is that? Who here in the room has a domain name? So almost everything. Who pays more than $10 for his domain name per year? Okay. Who pays more than $50 for a domain name per year? Okay. That's Swiss. Who pays more than 200? Nobody. Okay, but if you look at the average price, domain names are cheap. And even .ch domain names are quite cheap. That's the cheapest price you can get for a .ch domain name for 1 year for the initial registration. And usually criminals just need the domain name for 1 year. After 1 year, they don't use the domain name again. And the cheap price is good for criminals because criminals need domain names. They need domain names, whatever business model they have. So the most common things criminals use domain names for is phishing. You register a domain name that sounds like your phishing target, put up a phishing page, use it for 2 days, and then you're done. They use domain names for malware, for example, for DGA algorithms to connect to the CNC. They use domain names for fraud, for sending spam emails from new domain names that haven't been blocked so far. Domain names are used for targeted attacks. So if you want to do, let's say, exfiltration via DNS, you need a domain name. If you name it NS- and your company target, it's less likely that you're going to be detected. If you want to do spear phishing attacks with a phishing website, you usually put up a separate website on a new domain name. And in the last days, we have seen that you can make money with crypto mining in browsers. So you put up a JavaScript crypto miner on a web page, and then you can use the CPU of the visitors of a website to make money. and criminals started to use that. I will come back later to that. So how do criminals get access to domain names? We all have to pay for domain names, at least if we want to stay on the legal side. But criminals have another option. They can buy domain names, or they can simply take domain names from existing users. They have two ways to do this. So one is to compromise the DNS itself, hijacking a domain name and using it. But if you just want to run a phishing page for one day, it's easier to compromise a web server, put the phishing site on the web server, and then you can send out your phishing emails with that URL, because the takedown of the phishing site will take some time. For .ch, this is the number for the last years. The blue bars are incidents we had to deal with where we had a compromise. So these are compromised web servers, compromised DNS servers. And the orange bars are domain names that have been bought by criminals to run phishing sites, to do online fraud, to put up extremist websites, etc. Before 2016, we didn't even count them because there were so few, and maybe we had one, or let's say less than a handful of orders from the authorities to take down a domain name because of illegal content or whatever. In 2016, it started, so we had about 700, and last year we had about 6,100 domain names that the authorities reported to us, and we had to take action. I will tell you later what exactly it is. We do this as the registry for .ch. So first of all, I think most of you know what a registry does. This is the definition from Wikipedia. Says that a registry or a network information center maintains all the domain names in a database and then generates a zone file that contains the DNS server that are responsible for the domain names. So how does this look? We run a database, so that is the registry database. Inside there we have all registered domain names. We have all the information about who's the holder of the domain name, and most important, we have the information which name server is answering requests for that domain name. We then every hour generate a zone file, the .ch zone file. We sign it with DNSSEC on our hidden master, and then we have all the information in one file, and then we distribute it to our secondary DNS servers. So we have 8 secondary DNS servers, a.nic.ch, b.nic.ch, and so on. And out of these 8, 3 are Anycast clouds. So this is not one server, but it's a cloud of servers with up to 50 servers connected with gigabit. And then the main reason for that is to guarantee the availability of the .ch zone, and that .ch domain names can be resolved. We have seen some DDoS attacks against registries and against DNS providers, and that's, if you look from a registry security standpoint, the most important thing, that our DNS servers are running. So far we had some DDoS attacks, but there was nearly no impact on the usage of .ch domain names. On the other side, we have the registrar. So for about 2 years now, we don't sell domain names directly to end customers. We have partners. They're called registrars, and they're the ones who sell the domain names. So in France, in Switzerland, the biggest are Hausding and Insomni'hack. In France, we have OVH, and they sell .ch domain names. To secure this connection to the registrars, we use a protocol called EPP, the Extensible Provisioning Protocol. And first of all, the bad guys still don't know how to use that. And we also secure this EPP gateway over HTTPS. We only allow known IPs from registrars to connect to that API, and for sure we enforce strong passwords there. So far there was no incident. And all this is called registry security. So this is what you do if you have an enterprise. You look at your business process within your enterprise. You look, okay, where does the data comes from? Where does the data goes out? And you secure the way from the input to the output and make sure it's available and it's the integrity is guaranteed. Confidentiality is not such a big issue for the name servers itself because they are public. So far, we didn't have any accident for .ch, but we had a lot of incidents with .ch domain names. And the reason for that is that the whole system of selling and using domain names is much more complex than the registry itself. So usually we have a domain holder, so someone who wants a domain name, someone who wants to offer services with that domain name, basically email and websites. He then buys or registers a domain name from a registrar or from a reseller of that registrar, or sometimes from a reseller of a reseller of a reseller of a reseller from the registrar. And we don't know where he bought this domain name if he calls us, and he most of the time also doesn't know where he bought the domain name. Then we have the registrars. These are the ones that have a contract with us and that we know. And they sometimes use providers or tool providers that make it more easy for them to speak EPP to us. So some of them don't have the knowledge to speak EPP, or they have to speak to, let's say, 50 different registries, and they all have different features of EPP enabled. And so there are companies that provide a service where it's more easy for registrars to connect to different registries. If a domain holder registers a domain name, it ends up in our registry database shortly after we put it in the .ch zone file, and then the name servers of the domain names are oh, no, that's not a pointer, are published in the .ch zone file. If a user now wants to access a service, his recursive name server first queries the root server, that's not on this slide, then he queries the .ch name server, and then he gets the address of the authoritative name server. That's usually with a web hoster, or big companies run their own name servers. And these authoritative name servers answer the query, okay, which IP belongs to that domain name, or which mail server takes emails for this domain names. That's a little bit simplified, but still it's quite complex. And now the question is, if something goes wrong, if the website is not the website the domain holder puts up on the internet on his web server, what should you do? Sometimes they call us and say, the internet is broken and you are switched, you need to fix it. We usually help the people, so we try to find out what went wrong, and there is a lot that can go wrong. Most of the time, we cannot fix the issue ourselves, but we try to support domain owners that have problems with their domain name. We cannot do that alone, and as a computer emergency response team, we always try to work in a cooperative way. So we think that internet security is a shared responsibility. So we cannot fix the problems ourselves most of the time, but we maybe can try to find the reason, do analysis, and then talk to the people who can fix the problem and explain it to the domain owner why his domain name is currently not showing what he is expecting. The reason for that is maybe because Switch is not only the registry, Switch is also the National Research and Education Network. And as the National Research and Education Network, we run a cert for now 23 years. And we had the same there. We had incidents in universities, we had compromised web servers, we had infected clients. And we find out that the best way to deal with these issues is to actually inform the people who have an issue and tell them what the issue is and to enable them to fix the issue. For maybe 10 years now, we also offer these cert services for the registry. We are one of the first registries worldwide that had a computer emergency response team. The reason is because we already had it for the universities. And so when we saw the first phishing pages on .ch website, the switch cert was taking action against that. That's quite different than what most other registries will do. Most other registries say, content is not our business. So we are here to register domain names. We run a database with domain names and IPs, and that cannot be abused. We think different. We think, okay, if the usage of a domain name is abused, then at least we have a part of the responsibility. It's not our responsibility to remove the bad content, but it's maybe our responsibility to tell the one who is hosting the bad content that he has an issue. And so that's what we always try to do. Usually, if something goes wrong with a domain name or with a website or with email, there is a compromise somewhere. And as a cert, we try to remove that compromise. If a web server is compromised, we send a takedown notice to the hoster, to the registrar, to the technical contact of the domain name, and also to the domain holder. If a DNS is compromised, that doesn't happen so often. Usually we call the registrar or the DNS provider directly, and the goal is always to get things back in place. Same is for let's say illegal content. There is a compromise, but the compromise then is in our database, because usually we have a bad registrant data. So when do we act if we get a complaint? We get a lot of complaints, and we try to answer all of them, but we cannot handle them all ourselves. And there are different ways how we handle complaints. So there are different categories. One is malware and phishing. 95% of these cases are compromised websites. So the domain holder itself is a victim of crime, and then we need to treat this different than if someone who registered a website for phishing. We have a, let's say, not fully automated, but semi-automated takedown process. So there we go usually after the web hoster and send takedown notices and inform them. Another thing is DNS compromise. That happens maybe in a big scale once every 2 or 3 years, in a small scale maybe a few times a year. That's something we handle manually. And then we have something called illegal content, and that's different than all the other stuff because we don't know, or we cannot say what is illegal content and what is not. But still we get a lot of complaints, and there we also cooperate, but we cooperate with the authorities who are responsible for judging if something is illegal or not. So if we get a complaint about child pornography, that happens very seldom, we just send it to the federal police. If we have a complaint about online fraud, we send it to the police. If we have a complaint about pharmaceuticals, we send it to Swissmedic, and they have the experts who can judge if something is illegal or not. And then they come back on us and tell us what to do. I will tell you later how this is working. We don't do this at random. So why are we acting? We're acting since 2010. By then it was not really a legal basis, but in the end of 2010 there was the IAFV, and in 2014 there was a special law about internet domain names. It is called the Ordinance on Internet Domain Names, in German VED. And the VED regulates exactly what the registry can do and what the registry can't do. First of all, the VED says that the registry has an active role in fighting cybercrime. And Switzerland was one of the first countries who had this law and said, okay, registries are responsible or have a part responsibility of what happens with the domain names. And they need to have an active role in fighting cybercrimes. It then also tells that as a registry, especially, we have some rights. And we have some sanction rights given by the VED. And it also says when do we have the rights to apply these sanctions. And these are all the sanctions that are in the VED. The first one is suspension. So suspension means we are removing the delegation, DNS delegation, from the .ch zone file, so the domain name is not resolving anymore worldwide. The owner or the holder of the domain name still is the owner of the domain name. So we're not taking away his domain names, we just take care that it's not working anymore. And we have the right to temporarily suspend domain names if they are used for phishing, for malware, or for the distribution of malware, for the usage of malware, for ransomware now. If it is time critical, we have the right to suspend the domain name for 5 days. And we do this, let's say for phishing, we do it for drive-by infections, we do it for ransomware. And after 5 days, we need an informal request by an accredited authority. In Switzerland, this is Melanie, the Melde- und Analysestelle of the government. And usually, let's say if we see a phishing page, we suspend it. If it is just registered for phishing, and then we normally receive a request from Melanie that we are allowed to suspend the domain name for 30 days. And the second sanction method we have is the deletion of the domain name. We can delete a domain name after 30 days if the domain holder doesn't respond to our request. So whenever we have a complaint, or most of the time when we have a complaint, we ask the owner of the domain name to identify himself. And if he has no address within Switzerland, we ask him also to give us an address inside Switzerland. And then as a domain holder, you have 30 days to identify yourself and to give us an address. And if you don't do that, then the domain name can be deleted. And we use this for phishing sites, but we also use it for the fraud sites that get reported by the federal police. Then in November 2017, there was a revision in the law that gave us even more rights. One is sampling. So there is malware that uses domain generation algorithms that calculates random domain names, and then the herders of the botnet just need to register one of these domain names, and they can connect to their botnet. For .ch, there was once it was Configure. That's nearly 10 years now, but it's still active. And there was a second one. And what we do is we blocked the registration of the domain names that were not already blocked, so that the bot herders couldn't register their domain names to connect to their bots. But now with the new law, we're also allowed to do sampling. That means we can delegate a few of these domain names that are used by the DGA to ourselves, and then send the traffic to a sinkhole and notify the victims that I have infected with this malware. We even have the rights to do sinkholing for registered domain names. So that's even a much bigger right, because there we take away the rights of the domain holder. So if someone registers a domain name and then we find out the domain name is being used as a command and control server for a botnet, we are allowed to sinkhole, so to delegate this domain names temporarily to ourselves or to a partner, and then redirect the traffic to analyze where the infected clients. We haven't used that so far, and especially the sinkholing is, if you look at the privacy perspective, quite difficult, because if we redirect the delegation from the domain name server from the owner to our name server, we need to make a decision. We can't say we just want port 80 and we just want the botnet traffic. We get all the traffic if we put an A name in. We need to make a decision, okay, what are we doing with the mail exchange? Do we remove the Amex, or do we keep the original Amex, or do we put in other Amex? So that's quite difficult. And that's why we can only do this if the Melde- und Analysestelle Melanie is working with us. So it's a shared responsibility. And we haven't used it so far. And we hope that having the right to do it will prevent criminals to use .ch name as common and control servers. But if they do, definitely we will sync all the common and control servers and try to identify the victims and notify them. So this was the legal background, and Switzerland is was the first country who had the legal regulation, and it still is one of the few countries who has a regulation that gives the registry a mandate to fight cybercrime and also some rights to do things like this. Now I want to show you a few examples of what is the everyday work in someone who deals with domain name security. So the last 8 years, our everyday business was CMS compromise. So nearly everyone now uses a content management system on his web servers. Very few people look that they are accurate, that they are updated. We have auto updates now for content management systems. That's much better than 5 years ago, but still you have plugins, you have themes that cannot be updated. And so we have a lot of vulnerable content management systems, and they're compromised. They're compromised for hosting phishing sites. They are compromised for using drive-by. We have seen them being compromised in mass. So when there was a WordPress vulnerability and exploit was available, we had one day where we received about 1,000 domain names that were reported to us. And what we do if we receive something like that, we have partners that give us that information about compromised websites or websites that host phishing sites, websites that have drive-bys, websites where your computer is encrypted after you go to that website. We send takedown notices to the owner of the domain name. We send a copy to the registrar. We send a copy to the hoster, and we also inform the technical contact if we have his details. And we ask them to remove the phishing or the malware within 24 hours. And for phishing, we have the takedown rate. Usually the phishing takedown is quite fast. So the Swiss hosters and also the big international ones, they take down a phishing site within 1 hour. But some of them don't even reply. And then we check it again after 24 hours. And if the phishing site or the drive-by code is still on the website, we suspend the domain name temporarily for 5 days. And that gives us another 10% of the domain holders who react and call us, and then we tell them what to do. Some of them don't even reply. Then we send them the identification request and ask for their address. But we have about 1% of domain names that never answer. So we have a lot of abundant domain names that nobody uses anymore. And when they got infected once, after 30 days, they are deleted. The last thing we saw is that we found JavaScript. So if someone reports malware to us, we analyze the website statically, we analyze it in a JavaScript emulator, and we analyze it in a sandbox. About 1 year ago or half a year ago, we realized, okay, is a JavaScript on some websites that looks malicious, but in the sandbox we didn't saw any connections to a TDS or to an exploit server. And then we found out, okay, that is crypto mining. So we saw that some attackers injected crypto mining code on foreign websites and was using the CPU of the visitors of that website to mine Monero. And first we had a big discussion, is this malware, is it not malware? We talked with lawyers, we talked with the Office of Communication. In the end we found out, yes, if someone really abuses personal computers and the CPU power of these computers, that's malware. And so we do the same. We identify the holder of the website, and if we don't get a reply, we suspend the domain name. However, it's more difficult for us because there is a legitimate use of these miners. We see some websites that say, hey, you can get rid of all the ads if you allow us to do mining. And then that's something we need to find out. So we always have to look very carefully at this, and then it's completely legal. But even in the AV industry, this is a big topic. At which point is mining on a website illegal and considered as malware, and at which point it is a legal business model to run a website. This is the large number, so something we do every day. When I started, it was maybe 1 hour of work to look at the compromised websites. Nowadays, we have a job rotation, so we have a 30 of the day who does all the work, and usually he now spends about half of his time. If there's a big compromise, a wave of compromise, he spends all of his time and he gets some support. Just looking at websites, informing web hosters and registrants that they need to do something. But there are more special cases, so cases we only have once every 1 or 2 years. I think most of you have heard about that one. That was a domain name hijacking. So there were 94.ch domains involved. In total, there were about 500 domain names by a registrar called Gandhi in France. And we first got informed by SCRT, they called us. And a colleague of mine was taking up the phone, and he was new, and so I was supporting him while he was on the phone with SCRT. And I said, okay, tell me the domain name. And I said, oh yes, it was changed by the registrar at 11 in the morning, so he should talk with his registrar. And then he said, yeah, he talked to his registrar, and in the web interface he still sees his name servers, but in our database and on our zone file we had the wrong name servers of the attacker. And then when I realized, okay, if he sees his name servers in the web interface of his registrar and we have the wrong ones, there must be something wrong. And then I called Gandhi and they said, oh yeah, we have a problem and we are looking at it. We try to resolve that problem within, I think, 3 or 4 hours after the right DNS servers were back in the .ch zone file again. One good thing I noticed is you see the little green lock in the upper corner. SCRT, after that incident, implemented DNSSEC for their domain name. With this special attack, because the attacker had access, write access into the registry database, DNSSEC would not have prevented it at all, but it would, depending on the TTL, would have given more time to the owner of the domain name. And also the attackers didn't change the DS records in the zone files. So this attack wouldn't happen to work for the attackers. Still the domain would not work anymore, but the attackers, what the attackers did is they put up a website to deliver malware, so by drive-by, and they also redirected the mail traffic by putting up MX records. So here you can see where the compromise was. It was in the tool chain of the registrar, and then the registry database got compromised. Our DNS masters had the wrong NS records, and they distributed it via our zone file. Okay, another thing, so that was domain name hijacking. So the hijack is on the side of the registrar. So the registrar gives us the wrong information and we publish them. There's nothing much we can do it because we need to trust the registrar. We have some checks. So let's say if one of the big registrars changes his name servers and he's responsible for 100,000 domain names, we will check it. The next attack is called domain delegation hijacking. The result is the same. We had this in 2013. That is the website of NZZ. It's one of the biggest Swiss newspapers. When you looked at that website in 2013 at a certain date, you will see, okay, the web server of NZZ is not running anymore because it's a website that tries to make money from clicks. And when we looked at it, we find out that NZZ has 3 name servers, 2 of its own and 1 in the domain ipplus.net. Maybe some of you know what ipplus.net is. It's one of the biggest Swiss ISPs. And it was very simple. The DNS from ipplus returned a malicious IP. And we found out every query we do to this name server returns the same IP. That gives you the portal that tries to make clicks. So what happened? We found out it's not only NZZ, it's 15,000 more .ch domains. ipplus.net was a domain name used for the name server for these 15,000 domain names. And ipplus.net was expired and simply not renewed by its owner. And Melbourne IT, the registrar, had a very creative business model. The moment when a domain name expired, it was rented to someone who paid money for it. And the one was Confluence, who run that make clicks to money websites. So all the 15,000 .ch domain names were redirected to this website. This is an attack where DNSSEC saves you, because the attackers don't have the DS, the DNSSEC key, and they cannot write into the database. So our database was not compromised at all. In our database, we still had ipplus.net, which is outside our domain, and as a name server. But still, because ipplus.net belonged to someone else then, the wrong website and email was shown. Now there's another compromise, and I want you to find out what it is. What do you think? Who is behind this website? I assume most of you know what lematin.ch is. What do you expect? Someone got it? Maybe you want to look it up in the internet? It's an example of subdomain hijacking. It's not an example, it's even a demonstration of subdomain hijacking. If you look at the record for playrate.lematin.ch, you will see that it's a CNAME to lematin.playrate.ch. And playrate.ch was an abundant domain name, so we had something we called hanging DNS CNAME. So there was a CNAME for playrate.lematin.ch in the Lematin zone, and the domain it was pointing to was not registered. Someone else registered it, and he put up a website that looks like the Lematin website. What's special here is that you see the little green lock in the URL bar. And usually we tell internet users, look at the URL bar, look where you are, and if you have a green lock there, it's safe. And it even says it's safe. The browser tells you this site is safe. But it isn't, because it is obviously not the real site. The reason why most people will see the green lock and will think that it's safe is that TLS is made for encryption. It's not made to provide trust into a website. And that's a misunderstanding I think we do. We think, okay, with certificates, we can build trust. And if you have access to a domain name, you can get a certificate. You can argue, yes, there are EV certificates, but I think most of the people don't know what it is. So that was an example of the Cname hijacking. That means the authoritative server had a misconfiguration, and that was a CNAME that was pointing to domain name that was available for registration. These were 3 examples of attacks on the DNS itself or on services that run under a .ch domain name. And I want to give you examples where criminals buy domain names, and that's quite different from the incident handling perspective, because we don't have victims that have compromised IT systems, but we have criminals who register domain names, and what is compromised is in most of the cases our database. So criminals use fake identities, stolen identities, but they are real, to register domain names, and then they use whatever business model they have with them. So here we go after the identity of the registrant because they're wrong. Some of them are easy for us, like phishing. So for example, we have Ricardo, that's a very known platform like eBay in Switzerland. And every 1 or 2 weeks we see new phishing attacks on Ricardo. So what they're doing is they register something like, this case is autoricardo-opel.ch, and then put up a copy of Ricardo. And then they send spam mails and say, hey, you got a new bid on your auction. And then people log in, and then they got a credential from people who have auctions on Ricardo, and then they can access these auctions and compromise there. That's easy for us because here we see this is phishing, and the VED allows us to suspend phishing domains immediately. And that's one of if we see a phishing page like this, we suspend the domain immediately because it was registered usually 1 or 2 days ago, and the risk that this is a legitimate site is quite low. More complicated is all things of, I would say, illegal content. So when you really look at the website itself and someone complains, hey, that is illegal. Most of these cases are shops, so very popular are sneakers, but there are also sunglasses and handbags and all kind of stuff. They are hosted on .ch domain names that have been registered before, because then you not only have a .ch name, you have some trust, and you also have some visitors, and they sell the stuff usually for 1/3 of the price. So maybe you want to look up for a new pair of football shoes for your son. That's a real example. And because these domain names have been registered before, Google indexed them, and Google even rates them very high. And if you have the right keywords, you have a high chance to turn up if you search for these sneaker shops. Maybe you don't understand why the butcher around the corner now sells football shoes, but if they're cheap, you're going to buy them. And what you get is something like this. So you hope you can get the football shoes that cost 200 for 70 francs, and because they're so cheap, you buy 2 pairs, and in the end, you get something like this. So this is a real example, and he contacted us, and he even sent us the photos of these shoes. What we do in these cases is, because we don't know if a shop is selling counterfeit shops, we don't know if this is a shop that does some online fraud, we cooperate with the police. And in fact, it's not only that they sell counterfeit goods. What also happens if you buy something there, I tried it myself, 2 weeks later you get a letter from your credit card company that your credit card was abused to shop in the internet. It was even used to register new domain names. And they also use your address to register these new domain names. So it's something that's really dangerous for Swiss internet users if they enter their username and everything else there. We cooperate with law enforcement. So basically, law enforcement started that. So they send us the requests to identify the owners and give them an address where they can do their work. And then we found out, okay, there are much more in our database that look very similar. And so last year, we especially cooperated with the federal police. So they reported, in February, we realized, okay, they already reported 500 to us this year. And then we looked in our database, and we found 5,000 more that were suspicious. So we reported them, or let's say we gave the authorities a list of domain names, and they looked at it and say, look, these are all domain names that look suspicious, and we think they are criminal. And so we sent them a request to identify themselves, to give us an address in Switzerland, and more than 99% of these domain holders didn't reply. However, 37 replied. So that's why we don't want to do it. There are shops that sell sneakers that are in China, but they are maybe not illegal. And what we do in these cases, we just take the address we got from the registrant of the domain name and give it to the police so they can do their work. And the domain owner keeps his domain name. That's something I think we will see more and more. Even this year it continues because criminals make a lot of money with these. They send you a pair of shoes for $5, but they charge you $80. They can sell you a credit card for $25, and then they have a lot of addresses they can use for more fraud. These were two examples where criminals buy domain names. That's new for us, and we need to adapt, and we need to work with others. Before we worked with web hosters and with registrars. Now we need to work with the federal police and the cybercrime competence center and all the other authorities that can judge if something is illegal or not. So what is the conclusion? If you look at domain name security at all. First of all, from a technical perspective, everything starts with a DNS request. So almost everything you do on the internet needs DNS. For humans, the domain name system is the trust anchor to a website or to an email. And that's what criminals abuse. If the DNS is broken, so if you have access to a domain name, all the other security controls most likely are broken too. You can get an SSL certificate, you can put up an SPF record, you can get a DKIM signature, and you demark all this stuff. Most likely it's also broken. To fix these issues, there's not a single entity who can solve the problem. We need to collaborate, and depending on what is wrong, we need to collaborate with different entities. So you as a domain owner, if you don't want to become a victim and want your website look like you put it up on the internet and not like a sneaker shop or like a Ricardo page, what can you do? First of all, you should know your registrar. If something is wrong, it's good if you know where you bought your domain name. It's good to know who runs your DNS server and your web server. So don't buy the cheapest stuff, buy web hosting and domain names at a place you can trust. You want to know the registry. If something goes wrong, we have a cert. You can always call us or send us an email, and we can find out what is wrong if you can't. That's very important, two-factor authentication. If you don't want your domain name hijacked, use two-factor authentication. Use two-factor authentication on your email, but also use two-factor authentication on your registrar web interface. Most Swiss registrars now have two-factor authentication, and it really protects hijacking of domain names by simply getting the access credentials for the registrar. And also raise the awareness with the employees in your company that manage the domain names. It doesn't help if your security and IT team has two-factor authentication if the domains are paid by your finance department and they have access to the registrar and they don't use two-factor authentication. The DNS zone, that was the subdomain hijacking and also the delegation hijacking example. Look at your DNS zone and look for entries and sanitize it. And also look at your DNS servers, that they are up to date and not vulnerable. And for sure, use DNSSEC. We see a spike in the usage of DNSSEC now, so we are already at 2.5% of all domain names in CH that uses DNSSEC, and we think that DNSSEC protects your domain name in at least some of these cases. And it makes it harder for attackers to get up another website on your domain name. If you are a big company and you have a brand you want to protect, there are companies offering brand protection and monitoring. So basically what they do is they monitor if someone registers a domain name with your brand, and they also monitor the certificate transparency lists and see if someone issued a certificate with your name. That's very helpful to find attacks before they start. And that's most important because most of the calls we receive when a domain name is not working, it's very simple. The domain owner didn't pay his bill and the registrar suspended the domain name. So pay your registrar invoice if you want your domain name to run. Okay, thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions.
Thank you for your talk. I have actually two questions. The first one being, do you think that the rise in both fraudulent domain is related to the fact that Switch lost its ability to be the sole seller of CH domain in around 2016?
I think the reason for that is that domains are now available worldwide. So there are much more resellers, much more registrars where you can buy .ch domain names. And actually we see these registrations from registrars who have resellers worldwide. And the second thing is the price. You now pay €5. If you buy a .ch domain names with Bitcoin in China, you pay around $6. And that's compared to a .com domain name that's about $10 to $15. So it makes it very attractive for these one-time usage for fraud.
Thank you. The second question was more about political aspects. We have a current law which is in discussion about blocking casinos which are not registered in Switzerland based on DNS entries. Can you comment, or do you how can you say anything from the legal procedure perspective or technical perspective about that, or political perspective?
I cannot say something from the legal perspective, but as a registry, I can say, okay, if there is illegal content, we think the best way is to take it down and not to block it on the access level. But the problem there is that within Switzerland, we can only take down illegal gambling sites that use a .ch or .swiss address. But as a foundation that is a lot involved in the internet, we don't think that blocking domain names on the access level will solve anything.
You said that the 37 responded to you. Out of those, how many were legitimate, and what's the time frame? So if I'm a bad actor, I respond with a fake address. How long do you have before you track me down and find out that my address is fake? How long will my site stay up?
Okay, good question, because they try. They do. So usually they have a address outside Switzerland. We then ask them to give us a address inside Switzerland. We now also ask them to give us a copy of their identity. So when they give us addresses in Switzerland, we usually call them. And most of the time we called them, the one on the phone didn't know anything. So for us, that was not a valid address, and so we deleted the domain anyway. And the 37 that really replied, I mean, they really gave us a copy of their ID. They gave us an address in Switzerland, and I mean, there are complaints about websites, even they are legal. Let's say you sell second-hand Gucci handbags. Most likely, Gucci will go to the police and say, "There's someone selling Gucci handbags and he's not licensed." But that's not illegal. But still the police needs to investigate. And these are most likely the 37 cases. So we don't know, because if we validate an address and give it to the police, and the police also doesn't inform us what's behind. It's just so obvious with the sneakers shops that that it's counterfeit goods and fraudulent action. But you also asked about the time frame. You have 30 days time. That is an issue, because if you sell one pair of sneakers in 30 days, your business model still works. We're working with the authorities to try to get this down. But on the other side, there are cases where we have a domain holder who runs a business, and we cannot just suspend his domain name because someone said it's illegal content or it's counterfeit goods.
No more questions? Okay, thank you, Michael Hausding, for this talk.
Thank you.